First of all, my name is Juan Herrera. I'm actually coming from Colombia. I'm from Colombia in South America. If you're not so familiar, it's like the place that gave birth to places to people like Cuadrado or Shakira or Juanes or other not so relevant people. Also back in Colombia, I was the organizer of Angular Medellin. I'm pretty sure many of you have seen Narcos, or if you haven't, then you will probably let me know anyway. Medellin is a really nice place to be there, and you should go and visit sometime. But yeah, I used to run a community there and also a conference in Colombia. That was quite a nice experience. But then I decided to move to Austria. Which is hilarious because people keep thinking that Austria is actually Australia, and then you have to kind of explain the differences, which are a little bit big. I'm now living in Austria, and then that's where so we can do this talk because otherwise it would be a little bit tricky. It would be my very early mornings. Otherwise, we have like 7-hour difference at this point. So yeah, although right now in Austria it's 11 a.m., so it's good. And in Austria, I work for a company called ProductSite, and I'm also, last but not least, a Google developer expert in Angular and web technologies. So that means that I like do public presentations, talking in workshops and teaching and sharing. So you feel free to just write anything. And I can see that Stephen is already bragging about his Spanish skills, which is really good. Of course, James and Paulo Escobar, those are references. Nothing to do about it. So yeah. Anyway, so let's just start with something. When I do a presentation, I usually like to start with a problem. Like any seller, give you a problem. If you don't have one, they would just give you a problem so that they can sell you something. I'm no different. So the problem that I'm going to give you, I'm actually took the time to put it into a meme because I really like memes. I use memes as a way to cope with the tough times in life. So yeah, here's a meme for you. And what happens is that when you're using Angular, it's very common for you to actually follow the style guide because that's what people tell you. They just go through the style guide and you do it. And in fact, a lot of people don't like that. And when they don't do it, this is the outcome they get because there's not much freedom in Angular to do whatever you like. At least not as much as it would be perhaps in other frameworks or other technologies that are more flexible or open-minded about what you would like to do. Perhaps not a lot, but sufficiently enough to be very different from Angular in a way. Nevertheless, with time, we've seen that also there are other frameworks out there kind of saying, okay, maybe what if you just do it this way? Just not to be so creative around how to structure your folders, your files, everything. So we're starting to see this, but with Angular, I mean, we had this style guide, right? So the style guide is kind of giving you all the hints that you would need to kind of know how to do something. But the style guide is gigantic. It's very big. It can take hours to finish reading it. It's like a manual. I even made a GIF for you to show you how long it is. I'm just scrolling as fast as I can, and this GIF keeps going on and on and on. So yeah, that's how long it is. But what happens with the style guide is that it's a very convenient place to start, but there are missing parts in it, despite being so thorough. And over 4 years that I've been working in Angular, which is represented with these pictures, Angular clearly took the life out of me and made me grow older much faster than other people. Over these 4 years, I kind of learned a couple of things that I think are relevant, not obvious, and not explicitly stated out there, and I want to share them with you today. So the takeaways of this talk are 3. What's not on the style guide, I hope it's not there. Why I assess on an interview, when I'm interviewing other candidates for front-end roles or Angular roles, I usually take a look at what I'm about to share with you. Of course, the style guide as well, but also these little things that make it or break it whenever I'm reviewing somebody's code. And also what I've learned the past years by working in different companies, different industries, different projects, different teams. You can imagine, like, it's been a hell of a ride, 4 years with also projects. And I learned a lot. I'm really grateful for that. So I'm going to share that with you today. And we're going to start with TypeScript. So, I mean, TypeScript is the kind of thing that you cannot find your way around. You're going to just skip types when you're working with Angular. So let's just start with that. You know, when you're making an application maintainable when it comes to Angular, and when our clients come and they want to, you know, do a really good job and really build really high quality software, you will come across some tools that you can use that I'm going to share with you, but also some patterns or some approaches that you can take advantage of. One of them, for example, when it comes to TypeScript, is generics. You know, TypeScript is very popular. It's being used in Node and React and everywhere else nowadays. And there are many things about TypeScript that might not be so obvious. Generics, I think it's a rather fair and popular concept that you may have seen in other languages anyway, C#, perhaps Java. Generics that allows you to kind of tell the function that would otherwise be typed as any to tell the function what exactly the function can expect or what you can expect from the function. So you can, you know, pass a generic with the this greater than and lesser than symbols, and then you can, you know, pass a type there. And this is very common. I'm starting to see a very common pattern when I'm building applications in a way that it saves time and saves resources. So if you never used generics before, I recommend you to do it. Because it's really valuable, a really valuable thing, although really common. So you probably already know it. But there's another thing about TypeScript that you probably also are familiar with, or maybe not, and that's the utility types. If you go to the TypeScript documentation, you will see that there are plenty of utility types out there. And one of them is partial. The partial utility type allows you to do partial updates. Or it's a meaning for partial updates, when you need to update something, but you don't need to provide all the properties in it. And when I'm reviewing Angular code bases, I want to see people using, you know, all the advantages that TypeScript brings within, not just, you know, not just writing code that works, but also cores that takes advantage of all that tooling that is available to us. So this is an example of a utility type, which uses partial, and then you pass on a type or a function or class. And there is another one, another utility type called also record. But as you can see in this example, we have this interface called cat.info, has two properties, and then we have these keys defined as a type called cat name, Mifi, Boris, and Mordred. And whenever I create an object that I want the keys to be a certain value, then I can use a record utility type. And then therefore, as you can see in line 14, if I try to kind of assign a different key to this object, it will fail. Which otherwise wouldn't be the case if you just declare any object. Then you can just, you know, assign or access any property, even when it's not there. So records are also very convenient to use. But anyway, in total in TypeScript, there are plenty of utility types. So honestly, many of them I haven't used ever, like capitalize or lowercase. Hasn't been the case so far. But others are really convenient, and I suggest you to take a look to make your TypeScript code much more effective, much more valuable. So certainly check that out. But there are other stuff in TypeScript. There's plenty to cover, but we're just going to go through that quickly. For example, enums. Enums are also very popular. I'm pretty sure many of you know enums from other languages as well. They're very convenient. The two places where I find them more convenient is in interfaces when I need to define a type. So for example, I have, you know, this enum in the left called direction, and then I have this interface in the top called content. And then there's this property called placement, and I can just simply tell it, look, this placement is going to be either one of the values assigned in the enum by just simply assigning a type as the enum. But that's not it. I can also use it in switch cases, and that's where I find it more valuable, especially switch cases in the template of any Angular component or in a component per se. It's very neat, it's very elegant, it's very clear what the code is doing, and it saves you a lot of magic strings or magic numbers that you would otherwise put in the code. So yeah, so you can, for example, if you see a 33 or 26 somewhere, chances are that you're better, you know, hard coding that as a constant or an enum, perhaps. Also, index access types, also very, very, very common sometimes. This is a pattern that I've been using lately that I really like when it comes to HTTP response codes. I take advantage of index access types with in line 6. You can see that I have this object called messages, and then I'm trying to or accessing the different values of the enum as keys of this object to kind of be able in line 11 also kind of access them more properly or such. But anyway, there are just different ways in which you can do it. So just bear in mind that there's a lot of tooling in TypeScript that you can use and make your code more maintainable. For example, yesterday, I published a tweet publishing this image right there. And as you may have seen, there's also, this is more JavaScript-like, but I put it into TypeScript, the nullish coalescent operator or the chaining operator or all those operators that have really weird names. This is the kind of things that I take a look into the code. You know, if you look at the line number 2 where you're doing this object structuring, you know, it's very nice, it's really neat and elegant, but you might be missing some edge cases, like what happens if person is not defined, what happens if data is not defined, what do you do then, or what happens if you need a default value. So right, so in line 5, you can see how, you know, using the ternary operator, you're kind of improving that and providing a default value. But then you have, you know, very redundant text there. So you go to line 8 and then use the or operator, which allows you to put a default value. Right, but then you go to line 11 because you say, well, those properties could also be null or undefined. So you kind of protect your code from a runtime exception. But then you finally move on to line 14 because you also want to know that, or you want to make sure that whenever name has an empty value, you want to display the empty value, not the default value. So those are really, you know, edge cases, but that also at the end of the day, make it or break it for an application, or make it or break it for an interview. You know, like those little details that you care about can make a code base more maintainable, more reliable in the future. So something's worth taking a look. And last but not least, to leave TypeScript aside and move on to other things, path mappings. I keep reinforcing this every time. If you have something like this, you probably should have something like this. And it's an improvement in readability, in consistency. So you can certainly switch from one to the other. I advise that. And it's really simple. You just need to go to the TS-config and then just add some paths there. So yeah, certainly the kind of setup that I would suggest you to have. Although if we were talking about libraries, then there's one I would suggest you to also set up to have a very clean code, and that is Lodash.es. So Lodash, it's no longer as valuable as it was before because the array class of JavaScript provides many of the methods you could probably ever need, except for a couple, I would say. And one of them is the clone deep. What happens with the Lodash.es, it stands for Etmscript. That means it's modularized, so it's true shakeable, and therefore you're not importing the whole Lodash into it. And whenever I'm dealing with NGX or Redux or stuff, usually this is very convenient to have this clone deep function right there that does the job really neatly. So another recommendation for you if you want to build maintainable really code or code that is really maintainable, yeah, Lodash will be a good idea. And yeah, that's kind of it for TypeScript. Like those are the things that are not so obvious, but I come across 4 years of, you know, learning and trying and testing and seeing what works and what doesn't, and filtering out what really didn't work and what I decided to stick to. So that was it for TypeScript. But there's another technology that you cannot just get around when you're working with Angular, and that is RXJS. And there's this one thing about RxJS that I could not emphasize more, and that is learning how to combine and merge streams. What happens with observables and RxJS is that the first things you kind of learn is like to, sort of subscribe with the async pipe and not to forget to unsubscribe it otherwise, and how to use a couple of operators and such. But one of the most complex cases is when it comes to combining observables. And the problem with that is that there's no easy way to do it. I would say it's rather complex because you need to think in a timeline of events, when something happened, when something stopped to happen, and such like. And there are plenty of operators for combining. There's merge map, combine last, merge, zip, fork, plenty of them. So you gotta need to know when to use which one. And I couldn't emphasize how relevant this is for an application that will not only work, but also work well in the future. So I highly recommend taking a look at merging and combining streams. And last but not least with RxJS is that I'm also lately using a lot Until Destroy by Nathaniel Bessaniel, I guess it's his name. I'm sorry, I should have written his name somewhere. But yeah, Until Destroy is a library that makes unsubscriptions much more neatly and elegant than you just combining all the subscriptions in some array and then unsubscribing from all of them on Destroy. You may be saying, Juan, but why are you not using async pipe instead? Yes, I'm using async pipe, but over 4 years I discovered use cases or sometimes scenarios in which the async pipe didn't do the trick or did the trick, but then I needed to do a lot of extra code to make sure that I could use the async pipe. The most convenient way was for me just to subscribe in the component in certain scenarios. Of course, I will use the async pipe as soon as I can, but that was not always the case. So that's the reason I started using Until Destroyed, and I think it's really elegant. We used it for a project lately and works really well. So recommend it for sure. Yeah. So this is, we're reaching about 70% of the presentation. Is 30% of presentation still about how to make your code maintainable. So if you're enjoying, just thumbs up, or so that I know that you're listening. If you feel like it so far, I want to hear how you're doing it as well in a second. So let's just wrap this up. Next up, it's LinkedIn. So when it comes to LinkedIn, you probably heard and you're familiar with the fact that eslint has been deprecated, which was what we were using for a long time, and now we use eslint. Now, what's funny is that the Angular team said, like, okay, I'm done with linters. If you want to lint anything, you just set it up yourself. So Angular is kind of just letting people decide. Nevertheless, there is a new package called Angular eslint or something that you can use as an schematic, and then it will just put all the linting setup into your project, which is really convenient. So I really recommend you to do using this. As eslint is like the now widely supported library for linting, so I highly recommend it. Of course, it's very common for developers to just jump in and put a lot of lint rules, like I did, like I always do, because that's what we do. But yeah, maybe not all the rules are worth it, but it's fine. Just give it a try. I think I'm kind of obsessive when it comes to, seeing what rule is for and then trying to use most of them when it's not really necessary. So you know the drill. You've probably been there. Right. So prettier, also very important. You might be wondering, why do I need prettier if I have eslint? There's a meme that explains it all pretty well. What prettier does is that it fixes a lot of things. You probably already know this, but I strongly suggest that you use prettier. It's really a solid solution. Maybe you can use others, but most likely there are others out there, and that's fine. But prettier is really good and works really well with Angular and what it needs to do. So it does it well. So really recommend it. And last but not least, style lint, very important. I have to be honest, I never really used a linter for styles before. And I don't know, I never felt like it was really necessary. And it's not like it's going to make your application break, but it's going to keep your code more consistent and clean for sure. So I recommend style lint. Seems to be like the leading solution for linting styles. What happens is that, nowadays things are changing to other approaches with CSS. We're going to take a look at that in a moment. But at least styling gives you this really nice, results of, you're missing these here, you're using important, you should have more specificity here, and so on. So recommended that. And when it comes to CSS, another of the not so obvious recommendation is to use ITCSS. And the reason for this is that when you're working with components, you have your CSS very neatly tied next to the component, and it's rather short, 50, 100 lines of code. But when you have global styles, sometimes it goes, all the ways possible. And sometimes you have, CSS that applies to all the elements, to certain buttons, some utility classes, some colors, widths, breakpoints, and that is kind of a mess. So ITCSS it's not a tool, it's more like a suggestion or a pattern on how to do it, a set of folders that you kind of create and use for a certain purpose. We tried this and it really made our code much more maintainable in the future. So I strongly recommend using ITCSS or any other that kind of brings a structure to your global styles. Very important. Now, when it comes to specific styles, the component styles, you can use BEM if you like. Very, very popular as well. I mean, there are others, the Schmax and another one, but BEM honestly does the job really well. Also very well standardized. So recommend using BEM if you can, ideally. But if there is something I'm fan of, it's certainly utility first CSS. Bootstrap, Tailwind, and perhaps others I really like. I mean, you don't have to use them. You can still remain on BEM and write your styles on the CSS or SCSS. But I really like this one. So the amount of CSS that I'm writing in the styles have been decreasing a lot since I started doing this. And I like how my code looks more now. So really recommend it. Honestly, I think to a certain extent or to certain projects, it can make the code more maintainable. And last but not least, and perhaps the most opinionated decision or suggestion that I make when it comes to keeping your code maintainable is state management. And that is with NGX Data. So let's break it down. First, state management, it's relevant. You have to do it, period. There's not much you can do about it unless you don't have to do it, which only means you have to do it, but just in the component. So it's like, it's not there, but it's there. And when you have to do it, very robustly and for a big application, then you might go with Akita, NGXS, NGX, or anything else, or your very own fabricated state management solution, which I did, and was not a good idea. But regardless, NGX, as you might already know, it's the most boilerplate solution, like the one that requires more heavy writing of stuff. It's also really well supported. That's true as well. But I can see how some certain people just grew to dislike it, and that's fine. But and I also don't like writing so much code. But what's certain is that NGX Data is a killer feature of the NGX platform, because it saves us a lot of time. Seriously, like I haven't seen like something that could save us so much time when I'm working on a project, because NGX very much provides an abstraction that solves completely the state management problem with just one service, a service that has all the properties that I would need, the entities, the IDs, if it's loading or not, and a set of methods that just take care of all the HTTP requests, handling, storing, reducers, and effects, all of it. Of course, for that to work, certain scenarios have to happen, just like in life, for life to develop, certain conditions have to be met. Same is with NGX Data. But when they are met, it's really, really, really convenient, really saves us a lot of time. It's really easy. And yeah, I really like it very much. So I would advise to use it. I mean, you can now, good question for Stephen. Yes, you can use store. Actually, we do use a store, NGX store or vanilla alongside NGX Data. Because some cases we cannot use NGX Data, and that's fine. It works completely fine. We got used to using a hybrid approach, because that's the best of both worlds. And yes, also sometimes we use NGX entity, but certainly NGX Data is like the killer feature. If NGX Data weren't there, I would probably be more keen to try other state management solutions, but NGX Data, really, really recommend it. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much it. That's my presentation of the things that I think are not so obvious, but to me are really make it or break it for an application. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm open to hear how you do your apps nowadays. Maybe there is something else that you're trying, so I want to hear that as well. Thank you very much for listening.